would like to introduce Kathy Ruhf, the Executive Director of Land for Good, somebody that I have worked with for nearly 10 years and is a big inspiration to me, one of the reasons I'm here. So welcome, Kathy.
Good morning. It really is an amazing sight to see so many of you on a spring Saturday morning in this lovely but windowless room to talk about this really important subject. So I'm very glad to be here. This turnout really is an indicator of the surge in interest in farming, farmland, and particularly Berkshire agriculture. I don't have a farming background. I grew up on a quarter-acre in suburbia, but my father and his father were seed brokers. And so I didn't fall far from the tree when I, more than a quarter of a century ago, joined the New England Small Farm Institute, where for the better part of the 17 years that I was there, we negotiated a relatively secure lease with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in turn to be able to offer relatively secure tenure to small and beginning farmers there. So that's where I really cut my teeth on this issue that has been a passion of mine for 25 years. Land for Good, where I've been for the past 10 years, is a regional New England nonprofit. We specialize in farmland access, tenure, and transfer, all the ways that farmers can get onto, hold, and pass on farms and farmland. We combine on-the-ground services with the pursuit of innovation, stronger networks, and partnerships, and supportive public policies. So we really take a systems point of view, and we also take a community point of view, which is why it's so particularly inspiring to see this collection of folks here today, because every one of you, all of the sectors and groups involved here need to be involved as part of the solution. So why this topic now? In our research, access to farmland has been an issue really throughout U.S. history. However, these days, as you all know, good farmland is alarmingly disappearing, in high demand, expensive, and threatened with conversion. We also know that land access is an issue for all farmers, scaling up farmers, established farmers, beginning farmers. The shortage of available and affordable land constrains farmers of all types. We do know that for beginning farmers, it's a particular challenge. The National Young Farmers Coalition and the American Farm Bureau Federation, in surveys that each of them conducted, showed that access to land and capital are identified as the top challenges for beginning farmers. And beginning farmers in this case would easily be described as farmers who have been farming for 10 years or less. So even within that demographic, there's a wide range. There are people that are, just starting out, and people that are have really a number of years under their belts. At the other end of the continuum, we have an aging farmer population. You all probably know that. Twice as many farmers over the age of 65 as under 35. In the last USDA census, that average number is creeping up. Farmers at that end of the business cycle have huge challenges around succession and farm transition. We know that nationally about 400 million acres of farmland will change hands in the next 2 decades. It will change hands to people who may not necessarily be in farming. Some of those are farm widows or heirs, and some of them are non-farming landowners as well. And finally, why this topic is so important now, is probably most of you have been given a lot of thought to, is that we're really thinking hard and newly about our food system as a whole system. What it means for us to feed ourselves more sustainably, what it means to revitalize a more regionally focused and locally focused food system, where that food is going to come from, and how we can build our capacity to produce and consume more of our food in the region. I'm always deepening my understanding of this issue, and it's very complex, and it's always challenging and fascinating to me. There are a lot of cultural and policy tensions that emerge around land access, tenure, and transfer. We have a dominant culture around private ownership of property, and we also have alternative and emerging visions for how we ought to regard land and land ownership. Even within the farming community, there's sort of a mythology that you're not really a true farmer unless you own your land. But the facts belie that, because nearly 50% of farmers rent some or all of the land that they farm. Farmland is especially tricky because it's both a productive asset and an appreciating financial asset. It's also deeply emotive. Those of you who own farmland and farm on farmland, you have a strong connection to it. If you're thinking about exiting, you are particularly thinking about land as your legacy. The public also has a vested interest in our working landscapes because, after all, they are working, they are producing for us. So it's a shared interest that we have. Some of the tensions that I've been grappling with focus on the fact that we, as a public, or within USDA, encourage young farmers through our beginning farmer loan programs to acquire land through debt. At the same time, there are studies that show that new and beginning farmers without land debt are more likely to succeed. We don't overall, as a nation, have an overarching public policy about farmland access, tenure, and transfer. That's one of the conclusions we came to after a couple of years of study in one of the research projects that we had called FarmLast, which was Farmland Access, Succession, Tenure, and Stewardship, in which we really tried to uncover, what are some of these tensions and policy drivers. We lament that beginning farmers can't afford to purchase land, and at the same time, we grapple with what it means to actually be holding land in private hands. Regardless of where we fall on some of these sort of values and principles, we come to understand that the traditional methods of land access, tenure, and transfer are no longer sufficient to meet contemporary challenges. So we do need new approaches, and they require us to visit some of these very fundamental questions. Who owns the farmland? What rights in land? And does it matter? And to whom? What should be the public discourse around farmland access, tenure, and transfer? And how can interests and rights be most equitably distributed? I want to share with you a quote that I came across quite a few years ago, and it made my week when I came upon this. Equitable partition of land is the necessary basis of all self-sustaining agriculture. This partition and use of land may be in the form of ownership or in the form of right to hold land for a specified time. The ownership of land may be in different degrees. The owner may have unlimited right to sell and to bequeath, or he may be bound by certain statutory restrictions. Likewise, the rental of land may be of different degrees and kinds, and in some cases it may amount to practical ownership. These varying forms of land partition have arisen with the evolution of society. That quote is by Liberty Hyde Bailey, one of the fathers of American horticulture, and it was in the Cyclopedia of American Agriculture, 1909. That is a guiding thought piece even to this day for me. However, we need to get more practical than thought pieces. So we really need to think about what are the practical remedies, the best tools, and innovative solutions to address these current challenges faced by farmers and communities as well. How can farmers be supported through the entire business cycle, not just getting onto the land, but holding the land and then passing it on in a way that has meaningful legacy for them? And what role do all of you, the community, have in addressing these challenges? So for us, it takes a community, it takes a system. We can't just look at one constituency, just helping beginning farmers negotiate leases or acquire capital to acquire land. And we can't just look at the local or regional or national levels. They all play a part. We need to see all dimensions and scale of the problem. When I first joined Land for Good, we sort of played around with a tagline. Every organization's got to have a tagline. And we had for a while opportunity, legacy, and stewardship. It resonated for me, but it was inscrutable to most other people. But I do want to unpack it a little because it does speak to me in a lot of ways. When I talk about opportunity, I mean opportunity for all farmers. And in order to have opportunity for all farmers to build viable businesses, I think there need to be certain elements that do hold across. The land has to be available. Now, it seems obvious, but if we don't have a sufficient land base to help farmers get onto land and grow the operations to the scale that works for them. If we're not able to continue to produce and to grow the capacity of our production of food, we're going to be in serious trouble if you're keeping up with energy issues, climate issues, population issues. It all sort of points in the same direction. The land has to be appropriate. If it's available but it doesn't work for farming or the kind of farming that farmers want to do, it doesn't really help. It has to be affordable, and affordable doesn't mean the same as cheap land. So affordability is really a complex issue. If farmers had a lot of money, they could afford the land. Farming often doesn't pay by farming for that acre of land. So it has to be affordable access, whether that's purchase, whether the cost of land is adjusted, or whether there are other more affordable ways to get onto the land. It has to be secure. Security means different things to different people and for different purposes. So that's another sort of nuanced concept that we need to talk about. One of the most important things in this land access issue is that it has to be findable. And one of the most current questions we get from farm seekers is, where can I find the land? I don't know where to look. So there are a number of linking programs and realtors and so on. We have to do a lot better job to make the land and the farmers be able to find one another. And we have to address equity, equitable division of rights, risks, responsibilities, and rewards. And the land has to be, and those divisions have to be suited to the farmer. The farmer's personal, business, and family goals, the farmer's attitudes about building and placing equity, and that to understand that the farmer's relationship to the land is not static. Tenure is really a path, and where you start in relationship to your land may not be where you wind up. Legacy. I've talked a little bit about this. Established farmers need and deserve a supportive transition out of farming. And we as a public have really neglected supporting farmers on that end of the continuum. I came across a really interesting study a few weeks ago. It was done in Europe, but I think the same thing would hold here, that farmers make business decisions at the peak of the business cycle, depending on their expectation for succession down the road. So it's not a matter of addressing succession when you're 65 or 70. You need to think about it a lot earlier on because that is impacting the business. Farmers, like the rest of us, have a lot of fears and anxieties about thinking about succession. We've done some research on this with older farmers, fear of retiring, what does retiring mean on the farm, fear of change, reluctance to deal with ornery in-laws, taxes, death, all of those things that we understand and appreciate. On top of that, though, it's not that easy, especially in our neck of the woods, to find advisors who really understand not only estate and retirement planning, but farming as well, and what some of the innovative and traditional tools are to really make that transaction happen. For many farmers, the lack of an identified successor is one of the biggest obstacles. In an Iowa study of retiring farmers, 2/3 of those surveyed did not have an identified successor. Nationally and locally, this is a huge issue. At the same time, it seems to me it has the potential for an enormous win-win opportunity because there are many farmers out there who are looking to acquire land who don't come from a farm family background. So we need to really build a much more robust way of making those connections and helping those farmers through the process. And it takes a team. It's not just an estate planning attorney. It's not just a tax planner. We need all of those folks at the table, and it needs to be coordinated and it needs to be sustained. Succession planning doesn't occur as a result of going to a 4-hour workshop. It doesn't occur at one kitchen table meeting. The planning can take 6 months or a couple of years. The actual transition can take 5 or 10 years. So it really is an ongoing effort. Succession planning involves the transfer of assets, income, and management. I'm always reminded of a story that an Iowa attorney colleague of mine who specializes in farm transfer tells about a senior farmer who comes to him and says, "My son is just not ready to take over management of the farm. I'm really nervous about letting him take it over. It's not time yet. The old man is 94 and the son is 76. I like to tell the story because I know it's going to get a laugh, but it's also true. So this transfer of management, some of these deeper emotional issues, it's not just the mechanics, it's what it is that we really want to happen with these farms, who needs to be involved to make that happen, is at a pretty deep level. So the third leg in that personal tagline of mine was stewardship. And so we need to really think about the land as the third partner in this transaction. We've got the owners, we've got the users, they may be the same people, they may be different people, but then we also have the land to consider. The working land is a part of this transaction. So the question comes up, who is responsible for that stewardship? The user, the owner, the community, the public, and that is regardless of who owns the land. One of the most startling statistics, I'm not an academic, so I don't tend to collect them, but some of them stick to my brain, whereas other things that should stick to my brain don't. Nationally, 88% of farm landlords are not farmers. So I think that's cool, right? It's striking. That means that for that amount of land to be in the possession of people who are not farming is a huge challenge. And by the way, that is an extremely under-supported and acknowledged demographic. Very few services for non-farming landowners, very few educational resources, very little sort of regard for what that demographic is. The amount of research that we've uncovered and done some, it shows that non-farming landowners are increasingly separated from their land, either by geography or generation. So they've inherited land, that land has been inherited, they've moved to Chicago or they've moved to Boston, they're not attached to it, even though they may be renting it. So there's a sort of migrating out of attachment, and that has huge implications. So how do we work with these landowners? On the other hand, some of you in the room may be resident landowners. You're at the other end of the continuum where you're very concerned about the land that you may be renting now or contemplating renting. Some folks go from not being involved at all to being maybe over-involved in what's going on in the farm and where the tractor should be parked and so on. So these kinds of relationships we also need to really understand and support. Different kinds of landowners, as I mentioned, there are private landowners, some absentee, some resident, some inheritor, some second home, estates, and so on. There are intentional communities, there are investors. Now, we could have a whole day meeting about the new influx of interest in the investment community, and I'm not going to touch on it, only to say that it, like many other things, it depends. It's a continuum. There are some investment models and practices that we should all be concerned about locally, domestically, and globally. And there are others where there are folks who really care about being good partners in possibly some innovative and very mutually beneficial relationships. There are institutions such as schools and religious organizations. We have two clients that are convents that have significant property. That population is dwindling, and they really want to do the right thing in terms of their land and providing equitable opportunity as well. Lots of schools, educational properties are getting into it, utility companies. Somebody talked to me about a supermarket mall, in fact, in Berkshire County, where there might be land that, instead of them paying to mow it, it could be fruitful. So again, looking at what exists and thinking outside the box a little bit. Land trusts, both conservation land trusts and community land trusts, are playing an increasingly critical role in thinking about and being important, integral partners in these kinds of relationships. And then we have various categories of public land. Private land, 7 minutes, oh my goodness gracious. Public land, private land, public, municipal, county land, state-owned land, and in fact federal park land as well. So in any of these relationships, promoting stewardship and sound management practices is absolutely essential. So whether it's through language in a lease, in an easement, public policy, whatever it is, it has to be built in. One thing I do want to mention, and I'm hoping that I can make it through, because I always have so much I want to talk about. There are a lot of stereotypes and sort of mythologies, and like with most stereotypes and mythologies, there's some foundation in truth, that farmers on rented land are less likely to care about and care for the land. The data shows that conservation practices, this is nationally, on rented land are not as frequent as with farmers on owned land. At the same time, there's also research that shows it's much more complicated. That farmers' relationship to sustainable and conservation practices has at least as much to do with the culture in that particular community, education level, values, orientation, and so on. And it also has a lot to do with the relationship with the landowner. There's some cases where the farmer is much more interested in conservation practices than the landowner. So again, it's a nuanced conversation that we need to have if we want to talk about how stewardship can be fostered in these kinds of arrangements. My most important takeaway about all of this is that in all of these transactions, the most important aspect is the set of relationships. Who the players are, who are the stakeholders, who are the decision makers, what is the nature of the agreements and the principles and values that underpin those? What's in it for the owner, for the user, and for the community? To me, the structure or the specific instruments are what frame that set of relationships. So whether we're talking about a short-term lease or an easement or a bequest, it really is the outgrowth of what sort of sets of relationships and values direct that. So who else needs to be a part of this? We're talking about the farmers, the landowners, whether they're the same or different, service providers. The good news here is that there's much more attention being paid to the land access issue. When I started in this, certainly 25 years ago, nobody was thinking about land access at all. Even 10 years ago when we began this effort at Land for Good. I'd say within the last 3, 4, 5 years at the national policy level as well as in localities, it's really risen up. USDA Secretary Vilsack not only is calling for many more new farmers, but at a meeting that I was at with him last year, this issue about what should be the department, USDA's message about land tenure and ownership, and how does the department foster successful transitions. So who needs to be involved? Educators, planners, lenders, financial advisors, attorneys, local boards, local food groups, agencies, land trusts, and more. We recently completed a land access project, which was New England-wide. It had over 40 partners. We're working with AFT to train professionals to be better farmland advisors. That has over 80 participants in it, and we had to turn people away. So you can see that there really is an uptick in thinking about this. The findability aspect, more land linking programs, more dialogue about what good finding programs and linking programs really would look like, and more transfer planning services. Again, not nearly enough, but at least people are thinking about it. We're involved in a couple of studies about non-operator landowners or non-farming landowners, and also launching into a particular focused study on farmers without identified successors. So research community also stepping up. What's the role of community? At minimum, it's building awareness in having conversations like this among boards and citizenry to make sure that communities are farm friendly and that people connect the food system dots. With other hats, I've been involved with broad food system issues for the better part of 20 years. And again, it's only recently that Farmland Access is part of that equation, and only recently where regional and local planners are stepping up into the dialogue. So that all is good. The public and community have a role in making more land available and in fostering farm viability as a whole. For example, in the Berkshires, as elsewhere, there's a strong attraction by beginning and also other farmers to market direct. In fact, less than 2% of sales in New England are direct market. And if we only focus on fostering direct market opportunities, we're going to saturate the local terrain, raise those prices, and abandon farms that are a little bit further away. So we need to build more viable and robust regional supply chains so that farmers who don't choose to, for whatever reasons, market direct, can have those opportunities to bring their products to market as well. There is a role for policy, and I will stay away from the wonky aspects of that discussion, only to say that recently I was involved with a group, the Conservation Law Foundation and American Farmland Trust, to put this little volume together. It's New England Food Policy, and there is a whole chapter on land and land access. Again, indication that that's risen to the top of many providers and policymakers' concerns. And there are lots of things that we can do at the local and state, as well as championing for federal policy, incentivizing farm transfer planning in purchase of development rights or farm viability programs, put public dollars toward land linking programs, modifying the APR program to think a little bit more flexibly, and we just had a meeting about that as well. There can be tax incentives as well. There are states that give tax rewards, tax breaks to landowners who lease to beginning farmers. We could require multi-year leases on Chapter 61A land to create a little bit more security. So what does this mean in terms of opportunities for the Berkshires? Well, you all have a lot going for you, and I want to say that in recent years, Land for Good is really most excited about this community-based approach to solving these problems. So I think that what we're embarking on here can really be a model that can grow in the state, in the region, and nationally as well. You have a really strong and dedicated farming community with a deep history and strong leadership. We have aware and supportive citizens, everything from Berkshire Grown to the land trusts that have deep roots in this part of the state. There is a desire for farming here, and there's a strong Berkshire brand. There's a good base of providers, and we have already begun to start planning. And as I said, Berkshires can be a model. Land for Good is eager to be a strong partner in these efforts, and just as I look around the room, I'm heartened by the opportunity that we have here to work together on these challenges. So that probably does it for my time, right? Is the clock gonna ding?